U.S. President Donald Trump was blasted by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau again recently, but not for signing a protectionist move that would hit Canadian industry fairly hard, but for another reason. To talk more about it is one of our regular contributors from Toronto, Brian Lilley. Brian, our Prime Minister had more of a problem with some of the recent Trump tweets. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, and this is confusing both for me on why the Prime Minister would comment on this issue and not the other, and why the media is asking him about one and not the other. And of course, the issue that he's commenting on, the issue that the media is asking him about, is about his tweets that people have described as racist against a series of Democratic congresswomen. They call themselves the Squad, a bunch of young, multicultural women who are the new face of the Democratic Party. And he basically said, if you don't like how America's running, you can leave. And so that's got Trump in a whole bunch of hot water. Everyone wants to know what different political leaders think about it. Look, that's fine. That's well and good. But as a Canadian, my main concern is that this week, the very same day the Prime Minister's commenting on that and saying, well, this isn't how we do things in Canada. Oh, wait, have you met Quebec in their Bill 21? The president is signing a new executive order expanding protectionist measures. So for any infrastructure project going forward, starting in 2020, it needs to be 75% made in America products. The steel and iron within those projects needs to be 95% sourced in America. That blocks our manufacturers, that blocks our producers from bidding on contracts. That's not how it's supposed to be. Not under free trade, but just like the issue that we talked about last week with the transit systems, be it rail or buses, and we've seen literally hundreds of jobs lost in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. Well, this is going to affect steel and mills in Edmonton, in Hamilton, in Nanticoke, in Montreal, across the country. This is going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on any company that is big into building infrastructure projects, be it Ellis Dawn or PCL or, yes, even SNC-Lavalin. Where's the Prime Minister on that?
But let me ask you something. Would it be any different, let's say, if Andrew Scheer was Prime Minister or maybe NDP leader Jagmeet Singh? Because Trump seems to do what Trump wants to do. You know, nothing can really stand in his way.
And there is some truth in that. But here's where I think that Justin Trudeau has fallen down. One, so there's the Buy America Act, which is the one that deals with the transit that we were talking about last week. And that dates back to, I think, 1954. And then there's the Buy American Act, which dates back to 1933. And that's what the new provisions fall under. And Obama increased the Buy America Act provisions, and Trump just allowed them to continue. Trump is now increasing the Buy American Act provisions. So look, we're used to dealing with not just Donald Trump, but Democrats and Republicans, both parties in the House, in the Senate, in the White House. You keep getting these protectionist measures. Normally, it's the job of the Canadian Prime Minister, whoever they are, whichever party, to stand up and try and strike a deal with the president. Justin Trudeau hasn't done that. When the Americans set out the priorities that they had for the renegotiation of NAFTA, they had all kinds of issues where they said, we want better access to the Canadian market in this area, in that area. We want our producers to have this special treatment and that special treatment. Our priorities were chapters on gender, on the environment, and on Indigenous rights. Nothing about getting better access for our manufacturers. And now we're back to this. This is why this is an ongoing problem with this Prime Minister and why he's failed to stand up. Would it be any different? I'm not sure. But I think either of those two gentlemen, Jagmeet Singh or Andrew Scheer, would do a better job at trying to at least attempt to negotiate with Donald Trump.
Brian, there was an interesting development which took place recently at the Premier's Conference. You spotted Alberta Premier Jason Kenney slipping a note to BC Premier John Horgan. What are we, back in high school here now?
It was a little bit like that. I was expecting, John Horgan to pass it down, and then somebody would write back, will you go out with me or something like that? Very grade school, very grade six sort of thing. But, everyone expected these two guys not to get along at all. And other than on pipelines, I think they kind of do. They have respectful disagreements on the issue of pipelines in Trans Mountain, but Otherwise, I think that they have been able to find a working relationship, which for the people of Alberta and for the people of BC, you have to hope that as they're dealing with each other, that they have this. I can tell you, having covered these provincial meetings before, that quite often there's a lot of real tension with a certain premier. We'll call them hypothetically the premier of Quebec and a lot of the others. Francois Legault actually gets along very well with all the premiers, and I would include Jason Kenney in that. He gets along famously with Ontario's Doug Ford. But yeah, during the closing news conference, just before Jason Kenney went off on the issue of national unity, I'm watching them and they're passing notes back and forth and smiling. And by all accounts, from people that I talked to behind the scenes, very good working relationship, except on the issue of pipelines to the coast.
Yeah, that's a major stumbling block right there. We have to work on the pipelines. The little no passing is fine and dandy, but we got to get that pipeline built here. Now, at the same Premier's conference, Kenney backed up Saskatchewan's Scott Moe and said that national unity is under threat. Now, you have been a political watcher for a number of years like myself. Is Kenney right? I know many here in Alberta are feeling isolated from the Trudeau Liberals right now.
No, I think Kenney is absolutely right. And just before that, I had asked Francois Legault at the closing news conference last Thursday, I said, why is it okay to take equalization money that is generated by Alberta Oil, but not take Alberta Oil? And he didn't have a good answer. And so the last question in the news conference was by a reporter from Canadian Press who said, I'd like to hear from all of you. And there were 12 because PEI's premier had left. So there's 12 of them, and we'd like to hear from all of you. Can you tell us if you agree with Scott Moe that national unity is under threat? Scott Moe passed and said, I'll let them all react to what I said, and what I said stands. To a man, they all said, no, national unity's fine, it's not under threat. And then Jason Kenney said the opposite. Jason Kenney said, yes, it is under threat, and went to that very pipeline issue that we were talking about and actually quoted myself back to the room saying, why is it okay to take the oil money but not the oil? He was clearly frustrated, and he was expressing the frustrations of many Albertans and Saskatchewanians, people that I talked to last week while I was out there. And whether you're talking to the guy in the restaurant who's working there, or the farmer, or the guy working in media or business in downtown Saskatoon, the feeling was the same. A feeling of frustration, a feeling of alienation, a feeling of the center of the country does not care about us. And if that doesn't change soon, either by a change in attitude by the current government or a change in government, then things will get worse, and separation is on the agenda. And nobody says that that's what they want, but that's where they're at.
Brian, just before he flew out to the Calgary Stampede, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Montreal to take part in the nomination of one of the many anti-pipeline activists that he has recruited to run for the Liberals. So how do we believe that Justin Trudeau is pro-pipeline when he pulls moves like this?
Yeah, Stephen Guilbeault is a guy that I covered years and years ago in Montreal. Extreme left-wing environmental activist, wants no pipelines, wants all the oil to stay in the ground, and will not apologize for that, will not stand with Liberal Party policy, which the Prime Minister says includes building Trans Mountain Pipeline. He's not the only guy that's been recruited like this in Alberta, and yet the PM does this, and then, by the end of Stampede is out there. He's up in Edmonton with a bunch of roughnecks saying, oh, we're for you. And then he's down at the Stampede. Now, he didn't go to the Stampede grounds. He went to some pancake breakfasts and, avoided anyone that wasn't at a Liberal Party event. But he's trying to have it both ways, and he simply cannot. He has far more support in Quebec for his anti-pipeline view than he does in Alberta for buying the Trans Mountain Pipeline. He gets more support in downtown Vancouver, in the Lower Mainland, for his anti-pipeline views than he gets support in Alberta. And so do the math, and you figure out where he's going to land on this sort of thing. I've told you, despite him saying that Trans Mountain Pipeline will be built, I don't believe it. We're now mid-July. I have not seen any evidence of anything happening, other than a lawsuit starting that is backed up by the group EcoJustice. So that's where I think that it's going to continue. And then we're going to head into the election campaign And watch what Justin Trudeau says, not only in Quebec, but in particular in French in Quebec, as compared to what he says in English in Western Canada.
Ryan, there appears to be some confusion over Canada's new drunk driving laws. Some of it was caused by the Justice Department itself, but also by cases like a BC woman that you say was accused of drunk backyarding. What is that all about?
Yeah, well, that drunk backyarding is my term. I hope it catches on because, look, any of us that have a drink or two after work could be charged with drunk backyarding. And this started at the beginning of July. The Justice Department put out a tweet that said, with the changes in our law, be aware that you are guilty of drunk driving if you have blood alcohol above the legal threshold up to 2 hours after you have stopped driving. And a lot of people got upset at that. Well, it was in the law. I warned about this, as the law was being debated and said, look, here's one of many problems with this law. Bill C-46. This is the accompaniment act to Bill C-45 that legalized cannabis. This was just supposed to be about adding cannabis and drug driving to our drunk driving laws, but instead they made a whole series of changes. And so under the changes, you are guilty of an offense if you are intoxicated by drugs or alcohol up to 2 hours after you stop driving. And so in my first column I wrote on this, Hal, I quoted from sections 253 and 254 of the Criminal Code. And it's black and white that that's what the law now says. And people would argue with me and say it's not possible. And besides, even if it is, it'll never happen. And then people started sending me the story of a woman named Leanne Lowry. She is from Nanaimo, BC. She was visiting Maple Ridge on the mainland. She had to go for a medical appointment, goes for a medical appointment. Her and her boyfriend drive to a local pub. They stop at a pub. They have one drink. Then they leave the pub at 3:30, go visit her sister where they're going to be staying for the night. And they're having a family event in the backyard. She has a couple more drinks at 5:30. The RCMP call, say, oh, something's happened. We need to talk to you. She thinks that there's a problem with her family. Something horrible's happened. She tells the Mounties where she is. They call her at 6 and say, we're outside on your sister's driveway. She goes out. There's 5 RCMP officers there. And they tell her that she's being charged with drunk driving. She's got to blow into a breathalyzer. She's been sitting in her sister's backyard at this point for 2.5 hours and says, I've just finished a drink. I'm going to blow over. And they said, well, it doesn't matter. She ended up having to go through the court system, out $5,000, and still trying to fight to clear away all of this, even though she is not guilty. So don't tell me that this can't happen. It already has, and it's an unconstitutional intrusion into the daily lives of Canadians that the government never should have gone ahead with.
Ryan, most families in Canada have had to deal with the terrible disease cancer, but most don't have family members who are cabinet ministers who can get free flights aboard private jets to visit top doctors. Tell me about the latest ethics questions surrounding Dominic LeBlanc.
Dominic LeBlanc has been in ethic problems several times, going back several years, back when he was in the Chrétien days. He was found to be in a conflict of interest with the Irving family, who he's very close to, very powerful family in New Brunswick, well, across Canada, but in particular in New Brunswick. He's been found to have violated the ethics rules by giving a lucrative clam fisheries license to a relative of his wife. Most recently, media investigations looking at the appointment of judges closely tied to him, friends, donors, family members. And now he said, well, I took a flight from Moncton to Montreal to go see a cancer doctor. Now, this happened just days before. If y'all remember, back in April of this year, he announced he was dealing with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and he was stepping away for treatment. Very treatable form of cancer, but he needed to relieve himself of his cabinet duties. So Bill Morneau took those over while he was getting treatment. June 13th, just days before he announced, I'm better, I'm clear, and I'm going to run in the next election, he was on a private jet owned by J.D. Irving Limited, the same family he's been tied to before, that's gotten him in trouble before. He flew on their private jet from Moncton to Montreal to go see a top cancer doctor with his wife, who's a sitting judge, who, by the way, could end up hearing cases involving the Irvings, one of the biggest companies. I mean, it's the Irvings and McCains in New Brunswick. You are at some point going to hear a case involving them. So there's a lot of questions around this, both about his judgment on this and on the judgment of his wife, a sitting judge. But on top of that, the ethics commissioner said he pre-cleared it and said it was okay. because the doctor said he should go to Montreal, and well, his immune system is compromised because of the cancer treatment. You're going to run an election where you're going to be glad-handing people, but you can't take your car to Montreal. You can't take a flight. You've got to get on the Irving's private jet. There are a lot of problems with this, considering the number of contracts that the Irvings get, considering that there's questions about them involving the Mark Norman trial. There's questions about the Irving company when it comes to calling up reporters and threatening them when journalists ask questions of the government about the contracts they've given to the Irvings. And now you've got a cabinet minister on their private jet. That is an ethics violation, if ever there was one. And the Liberals are just trying to whistle past it.
Award-winning journalist and political junkie Brian Lilley joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.